everything to take care of them, and they shouldn't get a big head, in other words. So we're going to kind of continue in that theme as we go through chapter 8. So before we go any further, I'd like for Ray Daniels, if he would, to lead our minds in prayer. All right, so let's start with verse 7 and look at verses 7, 8, and 9. For Jehovah thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees, pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills mayest dig copper. So basically here, Moses is reminding the children of Israel that they need to be, to kind of continue to be mindful of the parental type discipline that's in God's plan here. He's providing pretty much everything that they're needing, and he's making a contrast between what they were dealing with in the wilderness, where it was barren land, there wasn't a lot of water, there wasn't a lot of food, and contrasting that with a land that's pretty much going to have everything that they want. It's well watered. It's fruitful. The land is yielding an abundance of everything that they're going to need. And I think the emphasis there in verse 7 is on the water, because that is such a precious commodity in that land at that time. And pretty much, if you read that, every place they look, there's going to be water. There's a lot of water in the flat land, there's water in the hills, there's water in the valleys. Every place that they look, there's going to be plenty of water. There's also going to be plenty of wheat and barley. When we talked about that last night, that's one of the things that was one of the staples that those people eat. The vines are referring to the grapes for wine. There's going to be figs and pomegranates and all the things that they're going to need to sustain life. It's also interesting to note there that there's going to be raw materials to make things with it. It says here that the stones are iron, and not meaning only that there were iron mines in those lands, but basically there's iron laying up on the ground. I was reading a little bit about the ancient history of that land, and it talked about the minerals being pretty much up close to the soil. Now, the way I understand it, in ancient times, they did have some iron mines in Lebanon, and but those had pretty much mined out quite a while ago. If you've got the King James Version, you might mention there that it talks about mining brass. You don't mine brass. Brass is an alloy, and that was something that several of the scholars pointed out, that in the original term it was talking about pretty much about iron ore and copper that was pretty much laying around. So all of these things that Moses talks about have been confirmed pretty much through the history. You don't see a lot of this mining going on today, but in that time, the archaeology has pretty much confirmed that these things happened. Now we also know that David later on collected quantities of this iron and copper, and of course smolded it together and made the brass to build the temple. So that even through the time where King David was alive, all of these things were pretty much there, and all of this area up into Syria, Lebanon, Israel that we have now, all those lands, brought forth this. Also, this is referred to a little bit in Ezra chapter 27, verse 19, and it talks about the ironwork in the market of Tyre. So that this is something that God made this promise that it was going to happen, and it followed through not only in the time of Moses, but later on in the time of David and some of the other ancient fathers there. It also talks about a lot of these springs, and one of the springs that the scholars talk about is a spring near the Tigris, and it had iron in the soil, and the water that was in the spring had that kind of iron taste and things along that line. There's also archaeological evidence that in the area of Lebanon, not only were they mining the iron, but there was also some smelting furnaces in that particular area that along the time of Moses was there. So the children of Israel had the technology and the knowledge, I guess more than the technology, to take this iron and use it to make the things that they needed. So God's not only given them the water, the food, but He's also given them raw materials where they can make their tools and have the implements and things to work the land and make the land even more plentiful. Comments about those verses? Okay, let's move on to verse 10. And thou shalt eat and be full, and thou shalt bless Jehovah thy God for the good land which He has given thee. So God is looking for the children of Israel to take full advantage of the blessings that God has given them. But the warning is, and we're going to see this warning several times, they need to remember to bless God, because He's the one who has given these things to everybody. And the warning all the way through this chapter has been, don't forget that God's given you everything. Don't take the idea that, I've done this and I've done that, and that's the reason that it's there. It's not that way, because the Lord is the one who is furnishing them everything liberally. And that's going to be a big deal with these children of Israel, because they've lived a pretty subsistence type of life in the wilderness. And now they're coming into an area where they're not going to have to do a whole lot of work, and they're going to have a whole lot of blessings and a whole lot of food and things along that line. So, they're going to be, compared to how they were living, they're going to be living high on the hog. And, God wants to make sure that they remember where these blessings come from, and not get too high-minded and proud about the thing. That's kind of the theme through this chapter. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 11. Beware lest thou forget Jehovah thy God in keeping His commandments and His ordinance and His statutes, which I command thee this day, lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hath built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flock multiply, thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied. So the point is here, don't forget God, because He is the one who is going to be the fountain of all these blessings, and He's the author of it, He's the donor of it, and because there is plenty, is not because of the children of Israel, because of God. And Moses is again reminding them that this is important. He also points out how the children of Israel need to remember God. Not just thinking, okay, all these things came from God. They remember God also by keeping His commandments, His judgments, His statutes, which He has given. So, they have the 10 Commandments. They have the other rules that God has laid down. And doing those things are just as important as remembering that God gives them everything. So you honor God not only by remembering, but also by doing the things that He commands them to do. And as long as they do these things and follow His commandments, then they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have plenty. They've got plenty to eat. They've got good houses that they're dwelling in. You got to remember that up to this point, what were they dwelling in? They were dwelling in tents. So, the thing about it is when you move, you got to pick up the tent and you got to set the whole thing up and just think how much better it's going to be for them, in these things when they, just think of how much trouble it was to move the tabernacle and get that thing set back up. God is setting them up in a situation now where that tabernacle is going to go away and there's going to be a temple. So, he's really setting the children of Israel up for good things. They're going to have riches. Their silver is going to multiply. Their gold is going to multiply, not only by trading with other nations, but also from the people that they're going to conquer. When they go into a land, they're going to inherit all of those things. And not only is there monetarily are they going to multiply, but their children are going to multiply, their servants are going to multiply, their flocks are going to multiply. So everything is going to get better for these people as long as they follow the things of God. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verses 14 through 16. Then thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget Jehovah thy God, who brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions, thirsty ground where was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with the manna, which thy fathers knew not, that He might humble thee, that He might prove thee to do good at thy later end. So remember, we talked about in the ancient language there was no word for mind. So we're talking here in their mind or in their heart. These things need to be remembered. So they need to be lifted up when all this increase happens. And the tendency is with man, and we've seen this all the way through, the tendency is to trust the riches and not trust the God that gave the riches. So there's kind of a prophecy here that the children of Israel are going to forget the Lord God who gave them all these things. And Moses is reminding them that, don't forget God. Just think about what He has done and think about how things were in the past. And I think this is an important reminder, especially for the children of Israel at this particular time, because this group that Moses is addressing at this time, they weren't in bondage in Egypt. And they didn't have it as hard in the wilderness as their grandfathers and grandparents and their parents. They weren't in the same situation. They're kind of at the end of the road, getting ready to go into a lot better situation. And he's reminding them that it was terrible in the wilderness. And it was terrible for 40 years. There wasn't a lot of water. They had to deal with serpents and scorpions. And even when God gave them something, it's like when the manna came down from heaven. The children of Israel had no idea what that was. They didn't know that. And God had to show them all these things. And the purpose for all of the things that he did in the wilderness was to humble them and to make them dependent on the Lord. So, the manna that they were eating, they'd been eating manna for 40 years. Now, that's not to say that occasionally they didn't eat something else, but you think about it, eating the same thing for 40 years, it get a little bit monotonous, And Bill and I were talking about Cracker Barrel. Man, we're going to have a crisis here, or not Cracker Barrel, but Golden Corral. All the Golden Corrals around here are closed. I mean, this could be a near crisis here. You go to Golden Corral, you get all kinds of good stuff to eat, but it's not like eating the same thing all the time. So, the point is, God is reminding them of the things that happened in the past. Comments about those verses?
Of course, we know that they didn't
remember. In the grand scheme of things, 40 years is not very long. And look at all the times they forgot in those 40 years. I mean, they couldn't even wait 40 days for Moses to come down off of the mountain. They already went and made the golden calf. So you're right on that. All right, let's look at verse 17. Unless thou say in thy heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. This is where the problem comes in. The children of Israel forget about God and they say, it's not God's power that does this, it's my power. I'm the one who made all this stuff happen. I'm the one who did all the work and did everything to make this happen. Now I've gotten all this wealth. I'm living high on the hog. I'm nice and comfortable. So now, I'm thinking it's me that is done all of this. It's my power, not the power of God. And this is what that gets himself in trouble. Is they forget the Lord in this situation and remembering that it's His power. Now, obviously, this hasn't happened yet. Moses is just telling them what's going to happen in the future, and it doesn't take very long for this to start happening. And when it does happen, and they start forgetting and doing the things that God tells them to do, that's where the problems with the children of Israel start. All right, let's look at verses 18 through 20. But thou shalt remember Jehovah thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant which He sware unto thy fathers, as at this day. And it shall be, if thou shalt forget Jehovah thy God, and walk after other gods, and serve them, worship them, I testify against you this day that ye shall surely perish. As the nations that Jehovah maketh to perish before you, so shall ye perish, because ye would not hearken until the voice of Jehovah your God. So again, Moses here gives the warning not to forget God's hand in the prosperity that they're getting ready to have, and that they need to remember that He is the one that has given them the wealth. He's the one that's given them the power. You would think that this would be well in their mind, because they're going to go in and they're going to have to conquer this land. They're a very small group in comparison to these nations that they're going to conquer. And they're going to go in, they're going to go have victory after victory. They're not going to have any losses to speak of, but yet they're going to completely destroy these larger nations. And you would think that that this group would be just embedded in their mind and almost instinctive that they would thank God for for all of this. And of course we know from history and from our other studies in the Old Testament that it didn't actually work that way. So we see here how God's giving and getting are reconciled, and they're kind of applied to the to a spiritual wealth. Doing the things that God wants them to do is part of the reason that they're going to have this wealth. So how kind of the application for us is that it's our duty to to gather the wisdom that God gives us, and get an understanding, and understand that God is the one who gives us all the blessing. And we've talked a lot about wisdom over the years. God will give us all the wisdom that we can handle if we only ask for it and keep God in the forefront. So today, one of the ways that we remember God and honor God is to do the things that He is has told us to do. And the blessing of the Lord on the hand of the diligent makes rich both in the world and in the spiritual sense. And we're not talking about as much about gaining all kinds of wealth. There's other things in our lives other than money that you can kind of attribute to wealth that that we had. So all of God's gifts are pursuant to His promises, and He repeats here again the warning that He's given them time after time, that if they stray away from God, if they start worshiping other gods, there are going to be fatal consequences. And one of the things he does here, he kind of talks a little bit about sin here in a way that the sin and the problem that the children of Israel are going to have is they're going to forget the true and the living God, and they're going to start worshiping other gods. And that's why Moses warns time and time again. He's done it in the past, he's going to do it in the future, about not mingling with the people of the lands. Stay away from those people. Don't get involved in the things that they're doing, because it's going to draw them away from the true and living God. And the next thing they know, they're going to end up worshiping some kind of false god. And the children of Israel can't sit there and say, oh, we never do that. Well, they did it back in the wilderness. So, they can also do it in the future. So, God is trying to, or Moses is trying to remind them of these things, and not to let their affections get displaced from God, and put it on the riches and things that's been provided.
Verse 7 chapter 9 reminds them of what they did in the wilderness.
Yeah, I mean and it goes back to, if you don't know what the history is, you're going to make the same mistake. You're going to repeat it. So he's warning them here that if they do these things, they're surely going to perish, and it's going to be at the hand of God that they perish. And it goes back to to the pride and not following the commandments that that God has given them. And the same nations that they have destroyed are going to kind of come back around and eventually destroy the children of Israel. And it's going to be the children of Israel's own fault, because they let those people get into their head and drag them away, not kicking and screaming, but drag them away from the obedience of the things that God has told them to do. So those that follow others in sin will certainly follow them to to destruction. And that's one of the lessons here that Moses is trying to tell the children of Israel. So any comments about those verses? Okay, let's look a little bit then into chapter 9. Chapter 9 through chapter 10, verse 11, is a warning against self-righteousness that Moses is going to make to the children of Israel. Now, the scholars tell me, and I'm not the literary type, you probably all well know, but the scholars say that from a literary standpoint, Deuteronomy 9:1 through 10:11 is a travel narrative, much like Deuteronomy 1:6 through 3:29, with which, in fact, it shares much in common. For example, both introduced and concluded by getting the setting in the plains of Moab in anticipation of the conquest of Canaan. That's what Bill was kind of referring to here, and that any success that they might enjoy in the coming conquest was not to be interpreted as a mark of divine approval of their own righteousness. The righteousness in this deal was God's righteousness, because he had made the promise to Abraham that this was going to happen. So it was going to happen despite what the children of Israel did, because God had made the covenant, and God keeps his covenant. Whether we participate in it or not, the covenant that God made is going to be kept. And in fact, both the incident of the golden calf and in the number of inhabitants of Israel kind of prove to be stubborn and rebellious. That's kind of the theme that Moses is trying to overcome here with the children of Israel. That deal with the golden calf, that was a stiff neck and stubborn and rebellious that Moses had been warning against. And really, the only thing that saved him then from the wrath of God was Moses' intercession with God and the relationship that he had. So the past experience that we're going to talk about here should remind the people that they need discipline for their rebellious ways. And we've been talking about here in the last chapter especially about parental discipline. God was using parental discipline on the children of Israel to kind of put them onto the straight and narrow. So, all these experiences of the past are going to underline the fact that Israel was dependent on God for divine care, for provisions, for protection, and forgiveness. All these things, the children of Israel had to depend on God for. And to forget these facts was to display an ingratitude and a self-defying pride. And pride, they say pride, it cometh before a fall, and pride is something that's hard to overcome sometimes. And that's why the lesson to the children of Israel about being humble and not having that pride. Okay, so let's look at a few verses here in chapter 9. Let's start with verse 1. Hear, O Israel, thou art passed over Jordan this day to go in to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of Amalek, whom thou knowest, and of whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth over before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them, and he shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord hath said unto thee. Speak not thou in thy heart, after that the Lord thy God hath cast them out from before thee, saying, For my righteousness the Lord hath brought me to possess this land, but for the wickedness of these nations the Lord doth drive them out from before thee. Not for thy righteousness or for the uprightness of thine heart dost thou go to possess their land, but for the wickedness of the nations the Lord thy God droveth them out from before thee, and he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand therefore that the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land to possess it for thy righteousness, for thou art a stiff-necked people. So Moses here is explaining the reason that God is giving them the land of Canaan. And in addition, God's promise to the patriarchs, back in it talked about here in verse 5, God was using Israel as a broom, as it were, to sweep away spirituality and morality polluted that polluted the Canaanites. He's going to drive them out, and the instrument that he was going to use was going to be the children of Israel. So it wasn't because of the things that the children of Israel had done that this is going to happen. It's kind of a twofold thing. Number one is God made the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they were going to possess this land. And two, God is showing his judgment on the people of this land because of the wickedness and the way that they live, and as they as punishment for them worshiping gods other than him. So it's not going to be for the righteousness of the children of Israel. They're not righteous. He just described them as a stiff-necked people. The righteousness is on the part of God, because the children of Israel have proven time and time again that they can be very unresponsive to God's will, just the same way that the Canaanites had been. The difference is God had made a covenant with their forefathers that these things were going to happen. And regardless of the things that the children of Israel, their faults, in other words, God was going to follow through with his promises. So it's God's righteousness that is being exhibited here, not the righteousness of the children of Israel. So God's choice of the instrument is going to be the children of Israel. And he's warning them again about self-righteousness being a problem in the sight of God. So the only way that they can avoid this is to remember the things that are going to happen. And it kind of goes back to immorality. The children of Israel, they didn't have a God. They didn't have a true God. They had these gods that they worshiped. They had false gods. Well, without God, there's no morality. And we sometimes, I think we kind of see that today is we've taken God out of school, we've taken God out of government. Where's the morality? And as the result, when God's taken out and the morality it goes with it, then you get a pretty bad situation. And that's what God's dealing with here with the people of this land. They have no God, they have no morality, and God is going to establish his power over these people, and the instrument that he's going to use is the children of Israel. So I think I'm going to stop right there, Bill, and you can pick up with verse 7. And I appreciate everybody's attention and comments. They were a couple minutes early, but that's a good place to